Welcome to another edition of Online TV. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann. I'm a senior consultant within the risk, security, and privacy practice at Online Business Systems. Online is a digital transformation and cybersecurity consultancy. Since 1986, we've been using technology to deliver dramatic business results for companies throughout North America. I am joined today by my colleague, Mr. Greg High, a principal consultant within the risk, security, and privacy practice. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate being here.
We've been working our way through in a series, a discussion of scoping and PCI. We have most recently talked about network segmentation and how you go about doing it, because that's essentially how you create the scope of the cardholder data environment for PCI purposes. We had mentioned on a previous segment that although PCI doesn't require network segmentation, if you're doing it, they do have a few requirements that look to if you're doing it adequately, if you're doing it successfully. So they want you to validate network segmentation, and I believe that primarily shows up in the penetration testing requirement, which, if memory serves, is 11.3 and subcategories. Is that correct?
Yeah, the whole idea of the penetration test would include a segmentation test as well.
Okay.
And so we would initiate a network scan, a lot of times using Kali Linux, doing Nmap, things of that nature. One of the ways that it's validated is to identify all the ports and protocols and services that are going in and out of the defined cardholder data environment. And what we'll often find, they think that, it's 80 and 443, and there are about 3,000 different other ports, protocols, and services that are actually out there running. So,
yeah, I have to tell you that the old pen tester in me would say if you're hitting anything within the segmented network, to me that would be a failure. But realistically, I'm sure there are supposed to be some sort of authorized ports, and there's some sort of necessary communication for administrative or
there is
operational reasons. So it's a necessity, even though I cringe every time I hear it. Is there obviously you've described how they think they've got 2 ports open and it's really 3,000. Is there a reasonable expectation that assessors have, or well, let me ask this question first. If it's part of the penetration testing requirement, and the penetration testing requirement can be done internally. It doesn't have to be done by a third party. So it doesn't have to be done by a pen testing company. It can be done by qualified people within the company. What does PCI provide in terms of details of what constitutes pass or failure, if that's the right terminology, for the network segment validation portion of the pen testing?
Yes.
It's a long-winded question, but what's pass or fail?
It really comes down to that, and this is one of the least favorite things that I find clients have to do, is that port protocol and service list. In many ways, it's very straightforward. You're going to have DHCP, DNS, you're going to have all of those standards. But let's say you get into no commercial interest, but an Avaya phone system, as an example. And within that Avaya system, it's going to have its own little peculiarities that you're going to have to deal with. So when you start listing out, okay, I'm listening on this port over here because I'm expecting to hear a pause command to pause this recording before I hear another command for resuming it. Those all now coming together homogeneously, that trying to just do network segmentation anymore is becoming less and less effective. That we really have to look at controls. We have to look at where in the OSI stack that they're actually doing the routing, whether it's layer 2, layer 3, application aware, web application files. So there are many, many places to validate the effectiveness of the segmentation the challenge is when you start going down those roads, you may find 9 of them that are effective and 1 of them that's not. And a lot of that's driven by a client saying, this is what I define as my cardholder data network from a segmentation standpoint.
Right.
Go forth and scan.
That's probably the longest variation of what we used to say, it depends.
Yes, sir. Which is a possible alternate name for the DSS, because in many ways it depends, and subjectively, since it's not a checkbox, a traditional checkbox, on being able to bring objectivity into it, it depends.
Yeah, it really is at the end of the day more of a framework than a standard, because there are sections of it that have checkbox type requirements, but the majority of the requirements are you doing something appropriately based on some sort of best practice, and show us. Let's take a look at samples of systems. Are there any other requirements that jump out to you beyond the pen testing requirement that sort of either explicitly or implicitly come into play when you start looking at a cardholder data environment that's been segmented in some respect away from a corporate enterprise?
Access controls are really important within, especially within a lot of technologies, and how administrators are defined, and so many different roles that they can play. So that's another piece that comes in. Everything else may look like it's not at all segmented, and at the end of the day, from an access control standpoint, there's a hard stop that card data won't go anywhere else. So it's just another part of that layered knowledge we as QSAs have to continually study, which is, I like the fact that I have to have 40 CPEs as part of maintaining my credential. I would do it on my own, but I like the fact that it is expected of our QSA population that we would be doing that regularly.
What about if you have an isolated cardholder data environment? I think you sort of alluded to this, but are any of the firewall requirements, requirement 1 requirements, do any of those come into play? I thinking in terms of like egress filtering. You mentioned ports and services, so obviously there's something limiting access there. So what do the firewall requirements come into play?
They get tricky. As an example, the Palo Alto firewall, when you ask for show me your firewall rule set, you'll get a whole bunch of PDFs with lines associated with them versus necessarily a command line interface. And when we get into environments that are heterogeneous, we'll have a layer 3 over here and a layer 2 over here, all talking through some kind of admin port that only allows one single way out to a third-party processor, as an example, for tokenization.
Gotcha. All right. All right. Well, it's interesting. It's certainly not cut and dry and clear cut, which is why companies like to hire groups like us to come in and help them navigate the waters. Greg, appreciate your time kind of walking us through this whole process of scoping for PCI up to and including network segmentation and validation of the same. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Jeff.
Sure.